Right in the heart of Singapore lies Block 62 Circuit Road, a modest housing complex, much like countless others scattered across the city. Every evening, the scent of cooking from nearby apartments would often fill the air, mingling with the distant hum of traffic as life carried on in its usual rhythm. Children played in the corridors, with their laughter bouncing off the concrete walls, while elderly neighbors exchanged pleasantries during their daily walks. In one of the ground floor units lived a small family, their lives seemingly ordinary like everyone else's in the building. At the heart of this family was a lively little girl, Nur Ashura binte Mohammed Fauzi, though everyone knew her by her nickname, Nonoi. At just 2 years old, she had an infectious energy that filled the apartment with joy. Her laughter often echoed down the corridors, a sound that had become familiar to neighbors. They'd hear her shriek in delight as she played, her voice rising in excitement as she ran around the house. But, as with any child her age, there were also moments of tears, cries of frustration when things didn't go her way, or when she was simply tired. To the neighbors, these sounds were just part of the usual ebb and flow of life, the ups and downs of raising a young child. From the outside, her world seemed typical, one of carefree innocence, where the days were filled with the boundless curiosity and mischief of childhood. Yet, within the confines of her home, a darker reality was beginning to unfold, one that none of the neighbors could have anticipated. On the morning of March 1st, 2006, what began as an ordinary day quickly turned into a nightmare for the residents of Circuit Road. 2-year-old Nonoi had mysteriously disappeared. Word of her disappearance spread rapidly, and soon, the entire block had united in the search for the missing child. The local police, relatives, neighbors, and even the community road sweepers, who often saw Nonoi playing in the corridor, jumped in without a moment's hesitation, combing through every corner of the area in a desperate effort to find her. There was an unspoken urgency in the air. Everyone hoped that the little girl was merely lost, perhaps wandering somewhere nearby, scared but safe. But as the hours dragged on and night began to fall, the sinking feeling that something far more terrible had happened began to take hold. From the very start, the search for the missing 2-year-old was destined to fail, because little Nonoi was never truly lost. Nevertheless, among those tirelessly searching for Nonoi was her stepfather, Mohammed Ali bin Johari. While he was typically a quiet, unremarkable figure who blended into the crowd, on this day he appeared visibly anxious, his expression one of deep concern, perhaps a hint of desperation. To the outside world, he was a broken man, shattered by the disappearance of the child he was supposed to care for. Yet, as it always does, the truth would eventually surface, and someone would inevitably face the consequences of their actions. You're listening to a special edition episode of Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, brought to you by One Up Media. In the year 1984, Mastura binti Kamsir was born into a modest family and grew up under the care of her mother, Rozana binti Saleh. Records state that Mastura's father remained absent throughout her life, and her early years were marked by challenges that set her on a difficult path. By the age of 14, she had dropped out of school, and just 2 years later, at 16 years old, she was married to a man named Mohammed Fauzi bin Abdul Kadil. That same year, Mastura became a mother to not one, but 2 children, a son and a daughter. Balancing the needs of her growing family, Mastura found her life moving at a relentless pace, filled with challenges far beyond what her years had prepared her for. As she navigated the complexities of marriage and child-rearing, her journey took a sudden and unexpected turn. By the age of 19, she became entangled in several legal offenses, ultimately resulting in a short period of jail time. However, it was within the walls of the prison, during what should have been the most vulnerable and isolating period of her life, that Mastura gave birth to a third child, a daughter. Born in May of 2003, this child was named Nur Ashura binte Mohammed Fauzi, but she would soon be known to all by her affectionate nickname, Nonoi. Upon her release from prison, Mastura's life took yet another turn. She crossed paths with Mohammed Ali bin Johari in 2005, a man whose background was marked by turbulence. According to the records, Ali grew up in a large family, surrounded by siblings and parents who provided a close-knit but somewhat tumultuous environment. Yet, despite this upbringing, he battled his own demons from an early age, most notably his addiction to drugs. His reliance on substances like marijuana and cough syrup became a constant in his life, persisting well into adulthood, likely shaping much of his behavior and relationships over the years. When he met Mastura in 2005, Ali was at a crossroads in his personal life. He was working as a freelance dispatch driver, scraping together a living, and in the middle of a contentious divorce from his first wife. His marriage had been far from harmonious, strained by his volatile temper and bouts of jealousy. Together, they had 3 children, all of whom remained in the custody of his ex-wife after the divorce. Despite the complications of their individual pasts, the two found solace in one another. By late 2005, their relationship had deepened and they embarked on a new chapter together. Before long, Mastura became pregnant with his child. Eager to build a life for their growing family, the couple moved into a one-room flat on Circuit Road, bringing with them Nonoi, Mastura's daughter from her previous relationship. By January of 2006, the small flat in Circuit Road, where Mastura and Ali lived with their young children, had already witnessed its fair share of ups and downs, moments filled with love and warmth, but also bouts of tension, uncertainty, and frustration. Close to every corner of the flat held the weight of unresolved struggles, with both Mastura and Ali carrying the baggage of broken marriages, prison sentences, and battles with addiction. Yet at the center of their attempt to create a normal family life was Nonoi, Mastura's sweet and spirited daughter. She was the unlikely thread binding their fractured lives together, the spark of innocence that seemed to lift the heavy air of their troubled pasts. Nonoi's charm extended beyond just her immediate family. In fact, Ali's parents and his unmarried siblings, who lived nearby on Circuit Road, were frequent visitors to their apartment. Even if they were aware of the troubled histories between Mastura and Ali, they were drawn in by the infectious laughter and carefree nature of the little girl. To them, Nonoi wasn't just a child. She was a symbol of hope, an embodiment of purity, and perhaps a chance for redemption in a family burdened by its past. Despite the happiness that Nonoi brought to the family, the reality beneath the surface was far more troubling. Her stepfather Ali still struggled with his long-standing drug addiction, and unfortunately, Nonoi was not shielded from these moments. She was far too young to fully understand what was happening. Records say that Ali would often exploit Nonoi's innocence as a shield to conceal his drug use, using her presence to divert attention and avoid suspicion from narcotics enforcement officers. He knew that as long as he appeared to be a caring father in public, the authorities would be less likely to call him for an inspection. In fact, whenever he felt the pressure of law enforcement tightening around him, he would present himself as a devoted family man. This was a manipulative tactic that allowed him to keep his addiction hidden, all while keeping Nonoi in the center of a dangerous game that she couldn't possibly understand. Still, the family carried on, balancing their fractured lives as best they could. That is, until March of 2006, when everything would change. It was March 1st, 2006, and the day began like any other for Mastura and Ali. As the sun crept through the small windows of their cramped flat, Mastura moved through her morning routine, preparing to head to work as a traditional masseuse at a nearby spa. Right as Mastura, Ali and the children were ready to head out. Little Nonoi, just 2 years old, held tightly to her mother's side, her bright, curious eyes looking up at the world around her. Together, they made their way to Ali's parents' flat on Circuit Road, just a few blocks away, to drop off the children. His mother greeted them at the door, and Nonoi's face lit up with joy as she rushed to greet her grandparents. On that day, Ali didn't have work, so he decided to spend the morning with Mastura, accompanying her as she prepared for her shift. But since today was Mastura's payday, and with some time left before her shift started, the couple seized the chance to enjoy a rare moment together. They treated themselves to a quiet lunch and took a relaxed stroll through nearby shops, casually browsing items they wouldn't typically consider. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, Ali had dropped Mastura off at her workplace. He watched her disappear into the building before he turned and headed back to the streets. But the sense of calm that had settled over him earlier quickly began to slip away. Without work to occupy his mind, the familiar pull of addiction crept back in, gnawing at him. His thoughts turned to his next fix, something that would offer a temporary escape. The craving was insistent, and as it took hold, his mind began to formulate a plan. It didn't take long for him to make a decision. He would head back to Circuit Road, but not just to visit his parents. This time, his plan involved Nonoi. Knocking on their door, his father, Johari bin Mohammed Yus, answered with a warm smile. Ali explained that he was back because he wanted to take Nonoi for a walk to get some fresh air. Calling out for the little girl, Johari waited until Nonoi appeared in the living room, her small frame moving cautiously. He gently told her that her stepfather was here to take her out. At first, everything seemed routine, but as soon as Nonoi spotted Ali, something shifted. Her face, usually lit with curiosity, suddenly crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. What started as soft whimpers quickly escalated into deep, heart-wrenching sobs. Clinging to her grandparents, she pleaded to stay, insisting she didn't want to leave with her stepfather. This wasn't typical Nonoi behavior. She was usually bubbly and eager, whether playing with her toys or spending time with her grandparents. But today, her tears flowed uncontrollably, and nothing Ali did could soothe her. Despite her heartbreaking cries, Ali took her by the hand and led her out of the flat, her desperate pleas fading into the background. Determined to silence her, he tightened his grip on Nonoi's hand, pulling her closer as her cries only grew more desperate. Then he raised his voice, ordering her to be quiet, but her sobs grew louder, drawing the eyes of passers-by. Glancing around anxiously, he took her to a nearby provision shop, hoping to ease her sadness with a sweet treat. But she refused the sweets, her tears still falling. Frustrated, Ali then brought her to a friend's flat nearby, but when no one answered the door, his irritation grew. As the day wore on, Nonoi's crying continued, with each cry repeatedly pleading with him to return to her grandparents' home. By now, Ali's frustration, fed by the constant sound of Nonoi's sobbing, turned into a slow, burning rage. Running out of options, Ali decided to take Nonoi back to their flat. The walk felt endless, weighed down by the mounting tension. Nonoi, still crying, begged to go back to her grandparents' house, but his anger was reaching a breaking point, each sob pushing him closer to the edge. Once they reached the flat, Ali tried to block out her crying by turning on the TV and radio, hoping to drown out the sound. But Nonoi's cries continued, piercing through the noise. Eventually, his anger snapped. In a burst of frustration, he lashed out, striking her face, body and thighs. He made sure not to hit hard enough to leave visible marks, knowing that Mastura would notice. But each slap only intensified Nonoi's cries. As his anger spiraled, his threats grew darker. He warned her that if she didn't stop crying, he would put her in the water. But the 2-year-old, terrified and confused, would not stop crying. Enraged, Ali dragged her into the bathroom, pulling her closer to a red plastic pail that was filled with water. Moments later, the shrill sound of his phone echoed from the living room, cutting through the tension. The sudden ring had interrupted the chaotic scene, momentarily pulling him out of his rage. He stormed out to answer it, distracted by the unexpected call. Hello? Records indicate that Ali had indeed engaged in a brief conversation, though later he couldn't recall who had been on the other end of the line or what they had discussed. The exchange was quick, and as soon as it ended, he hung up the phone. But when he returned to the bathroom, something was different. The crying, Nonoi's desperate sobs that had filled the air moments before, had stopped. As the evening approached, Ali returned to his parents' apartment, carrying Nonoi in his arms. But this time, his face was tense, as if burdened by something far heavier than the little girl he held. Slipping inside, he exchanged a few casual words with his siblings, calmly explaining that Nonoi had fallen asleep after an exhausting walk. He spoke of needing to put her to bed for a rest, his voice steady, but beneath it, a nervous edge lingered. From the kitchen, Ali's father, Johari, noticed his son moving toward one of the bedrooms with Nonoi in tow. Concerned for his granddaughter, Johari followed, intending to help tuck the little girl into bed. But as he entered the room, he couldn't help but notice some tension on Ali's face. Yet, trusting his son, Johari pushed aside his doubts, assuming Nonoi was simply in a deep sleep after the long day. After setting her down, Ali and his father returned to the living room. The silence between them was thick, interrupted only by Ali's sudden announcement that he needed to step out again. To meet a friend, he said. He asked Johari to keep an eye on Nonoi while she rested, assuring him it wouldn't be for long. Johari, seeing nothing amiss, nodded, thinking nothing more of it, as his son slipped out of the house. At around 7:20 p.m., Ali's father went to the bathroom to perform his ablutions in preparation for his evening prayers. Before beginning, he glanced toward the bedroom where Nonoi lay, still fast asleep. The apartment was quiet, with no one else around, just him and the sleeping child in the back room. 20 minutes later, after finishing his prayers and carefully folding the mat, he instinctively looked back toward the bedroom, and a sudden chill washed over him. Nonoi was no longer in the bed. In desperation, Johari called out to the rest of the family, his voice strained and urgent. In response, the flat erupted into chaos as relatives rushed in, their voices rising as they called Nonoi's name and searched every corner. Johari, shaking with anxiety, grabbed the phone and dialed Ali's number. Within minutes, Ali stormed into the flat, his presence electric with rage. How could you let this happen? You were supposed to be watching her. Ali's voice cut through the air, sharp and filled with blame. He joined the frantic search, barking orders at the relatives as if they were all at fault. This is your fault, he yelled, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with fury. Johari was taken aback, stunned by his son's sudden outburst. He had seen Ali lose his temper before, but never like this. The anger was raw, and the intensity with which it was directed at him felt foreign, even unsettling. For the next few hours, the family scoured every corner of the Circuit Road estate, alleyways, playgrounds, stairwells, and any place a small child might hide. Meanwhile, The estate, usually filled with the laughter of children and the hum of neighbors chatting, had fallen eerily silent, replaced by the worried calls for Nonoi. As the clock struck 11 p.m., and still with no sign of the 2-year-old, the tension had reached a breaking point. By this time, Mastura had returned from work and was unable to bear the agonizing uncertainty any longer. With her voice trembling, she dialed the police, reporting her 2-year-old daughter missing. Within minutes, officers were on the scene, searching the estate, questioning neighbors, taking statements, and coordinating a wider search effort. But despite this, Nonoi wouldn't be found. At least, not tonight. The following day, the search for Nonoi intensified, but now the scene had changed. Reporters had flooded the estate, and Nonoi's innocent face, framed by her soft, shoulder-length hair, was seen everywhere, plastered on posters and flyers that blanketed the neighborhood. Her image had become the symbol of a desperate plea for help. Moved by the gravity of the situation, many members of the community stepped in to join the search, some clutching the flyers with Nonoi's face on them. These volunteers combed through alleyways, parks, and stairwells, tirelessly searching for any sign of the little girl. Even taxi drivers across Singapore were instructed to keep an eye out for Nonoi as they traveled the busy streets. Yet, with every passing hour, hope began to feel like a tightening noose around the family. And perhaps for one member of the family, that noose was tightening even more. It was March 5th, 2006, 4 days since Nonoi had disappeared. Clutching a stack of flyers in his hands, Ali left his home to continue the search. This had become routine for the family, distributing posters, fielding calls from concerned citizens, and chasing down leads. But each lead had turned into a dead end, and Nonoi was still missing. The sun blazed down as Ali walked past the countless missing posters plastered across walls, lampposts, and doorways along Circuit Road. He kept his head down, each step feeling heavier than the last. His mission was the same as every day before, to spread the word about his missing stepdaughter, whose face had captured the attention of the entire country. But today felt different. As he walked further from the estate, leaving Circuit Road behind, he searched for another empty spot to post a flyer. Flipping through the stack, he fumbled, and several papers slipped from his hands, scattering onto the ground. Frustrated, he quickly crouched down to gather the crumpled flyers before the wind could carry them away. But as he stood back up, a disturbing realization hit him. His hands were trembling. On the paper, Nonoi's small, smiling face stared back at him, innocent and full of life. Ali knew exactly what had happened to her. Something terrible, something irreversible, but the weight of that truth was too much for him to bear, and it hung over him like a storm cloud he couldn't escape. For the rest of the day, the burden pressed down harder than ever, suffocating him. The truth gnawed at him relentlessly, and while he had managed to keep it hidden thus far, the pressure had become unbearable. By March 6, 2006, 5 agonizing days had passed since Nonoi disappeared. That morning, Ali emerged from the bedroom to find his wife, Mastura, sitting in the living room with her mother, Rosanna. Rosanna's arms were wrapped around her daughter, attempting to console her. But the sight of them together felt like a knife pressing against his chest, twisting with every breath. His head was clouded, weighed down by the truth he had fought so hard to bury. Ali walked toward them, his footsteps heavy, his head hanging low. Then, without warning, he dropped to his knees. Both women stared at him, frozen in shock. For 5 long days, Ali had played the role of the grieving stepfather, joining the frantic search for Nonoi. But now, the facade was about to shatter, and he would reveal the dark truth that he had been the devil all along. With his voice barely a whisper, Ali muttered the words, "Nonoi is gone." "What do you mean she's gone?" Mastura's voice cracked, barely holding it together as her face twisted in disbelief. Ali looked up, his eyes wild, his face streaked with tears. I didn't mean to. She drowned. It was an accident." He choked, each word tearing through him. Hearing this, Mastura let out a heart-wrenching wail before collapsing to the floor. At 11:45 a.m., Muhammad Ali turned himself in at the police station. Later that day, Ali led the police to a spot beneath a flyover along the Pan Island Expressway. There, at the lowest point of the flyover, officers found the partially decomposed and naked body of a small female toddler with shoulder-length hair. The gruesome sight confirmed their worst fears. DNA tests were swiftly conducted, and the results left no doubt. The body was that of the missing 2-year-old, Nonoi. As the police escorted Ali away from the scene, a wave of anger swept through the crowd that had gathered. Neighbors, volunteers, and strangers who had once joined him in the search for Nonoi's safe return now hurled curses and expletives at him. The fury in their voices was palpable, directed at the man who had pretended to be a devastated stepfather, all while knowing the truth. Now, the facade had shattered, and the community was condemning the monster that had hidden behind the mask of a grieving parent. On March 7th, 2006, 3 days after his arrest, 29-year-old Mohammed Ali was officially charged with murder. As he stood in court, he turned toward his family and begged for their forgiveness, telling them he loved them. However, there was one person he did not look at: his wife, Mastura. During the hearing, both sides of the family, visibly shaken and devastated by the unfolding tragedy, remained silent. But what actually happened to the little girl? After Nonoi's body was recovered, a post-mortem examination was conducted. In her autopsy report, the pathologist noted that the examination of her external genitalia revealed extensive lacerations, including the complete destruction of her hymen, accompanied by a localized acute hemorrhage. In other words, Nonoi had several injuries that were consistent with sexual assault. Reports also stated that her lungs were found to be overexpanded and filled with water, signs consistent with drowning or immersion in water. Despite these findings, the pathologist could not definitively establish the cause of death. He said that while the sexual injuries were severe, they were not, in and of themselves, sufficient to cause death. His report suggested that the most likely cause of death was drowning, though he considered alternative possibilities, such as a seizure or abnormal heart rhythm. However, he emphasized that Nonoi's death was unlikely to have been the result of natural causes. Additionally, tests for semen or other DNA around the victim came back negative. On March 8, 2006, Nonoi was laid to rest following a brief funeral service held by her family. Reports from the day highlighted the profound emotional toll on Nonoi's family. Her mother was unable to leave her daughter's side after the burial, while the child's paternal grandmother fainted during the service. Among the mourners was Mohammed Fauzi bin Abdul Kadil, Nonoi's biological father and Mastura's first husband. The weight of what Muhammad Ali had done could not be erased. There was nothing anyone could do to bring the girl back. But with Nonoi finally laid to rest, there was one more thing left to do: to find the truth about what happened and to make Ali pay for his actions. We know that on the day of the incident, Ali had dragged the crying Nonoi out of her grandparents' home. Records state that he had only dragged her out that day because he wanted to use drugs and needed her by his side to seem less suspicious. But since she was crying non-stop, his frustration quickly turned to anger, and by the time they reached home, Ali snapped. Furious, he dragged her to the bathroom, where a red plastic pail of water sat. He then gripped her by the legs and dunked her headfirst into the water, pulling her out only to see her wet, terrified face. He demanded again for her to stop crying, but she couldn't. He then ordered the 2-year-old to clean herself, but when she couldn't, Ali took over, his actions careless, rough and brutal. After this, he filled the pail with water again and dunked her twice more. She gasped and choked, but he didn't care. On the third immersion, he held her down longer, rage consuming him. He later claimed his phone rang, and while he went out to answer it, he left her submerged and struggling. By the time he returned, panic surged through him as he pulled her out, trying in vain to revive her. But it was too late. Nonoi was gone. However, when Ali appeared in court, his story shifted. He said he was sure he heard a ringing sound during the incident, but claimed he couldn't be certain whether it came from his phone or the radio. These were the words that he said to a police investigative officer that was questioning him. "I hit her at legs. I slap her face. I dip her into a pail of water, head first, which caused her death. I do not have the intention to do all these as I am not a murderer, and I am not a rapist. When she has died, I become afraid, and I hide her body in a drain. Instead of giving the death sentence, just imprison me. I ask for forgiveness from everyone, and also from the deceased." On April 4th, 2007, a year after the tragic death of 2-year-old Nonoi, her stepfather, Mohammed Ali, stood trial for her murder. The prosecution argued that Ali's actions were deliberate, describing a man whose frustration had escalated into violence, leading to Nonoi's repeated immersion in a pail of water until she drowned. Forensic and psychiatric experts also testified and examined many of Ali's conflicting statements. His defense wavered between denial and remorse. Ali claimed he loved Nonoi and had only intended to discipline her, not kill her, insisting that a phone call had distracted him during the fatal third immersion. However, phone records showed no evidence of such a call. He also forcefully denied any attempt of sexually abusing his stepdaughter, and while there was no conclusive proof of rape, forensic evidence revealed significant physical trauma and signs of possible sexual interference. By the time Nonoi's body was found beneath the flyover, it had already begun to decompose, which made efforts to determine the exact cause of her death extremely complicated. The autopsy suggested drowning, but genetic tests raised the possibility of sudden cardiac arrest. To support their case, the prosecution arranged for Ali to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The results described him as a man with low intelligence, a history of drug abuse, and poor impulse control, all of which likely contributed to his violent outburst. What had initially been expected to be a straightforward 8-day trial stretched on for months as both sides fiercely debated the truth behind Nonoi's final moments. But was Nonoi's death a direct result of Ali's violent actions, or did an underlying heart condition trigger a fatal heart attack or seizure? Or could it have been a combination of both? On August 31st, 2007, the court was prepared to announce its verdict. The prosecution portrayed Ali as a cold-blooded killer who had meticulously concealed his crime and showed no remorse for his actions. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded for leniency, arguing that Ali's actions were the result of a momentary lapse, an impulsive act born from frustration. As the judge delivered the verdict, he dismantled the defense's argument, pointing to the overwhelming evidence of Ali's intent to cause harm. His inconsistent statements, evasiveness, the brutal circumstances of Nonoi's death, and the physical trauma revealed in the forensic report all painted a damning picture. On the record, the judge said, "The accused intentionally kept Nonoi immersed in the water for a longer duration on the third occasion, and it was not accidental." Muhammad Ali was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. In April 2008, Ali submitted an appeal against his death sentence, with his lawyers arguing that he had never intended to cause any physical harm to his stepdaughter. However, the appeal was quickly dismissed by a panel of 3 judges. As his execution date approached, Ali made a haunting request to his family in his final days. He asked to be buried near Nonoi, the stepdaughter whose innocent life he had taken. As far as we know, this request was never granted. On the morning of December 19th, 2008, just as dawn began to break, Muhammad Ali was led to the gallows at Changi Prison. Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, is brought to you by OneUp Media. This episode was produced and written by Guangjin, edited by Alex, narrated by Jason, audio experience by Ethan Sam, additional engineering by Ashley from OneUp Media. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.